And now, finally, last but not least, we have Annaliese Meyer, who's from MIT-WHOI Joint Program. Take it away, Annaliese.
Who are you? Really think about that for a second. Now, I don't want to give anyone an existential crisis just yet, so I'll give you an answer. This is you. You're around 30 trillion human cells all stuck together. Now add 38 trillion microbial cells to your self-image. Those 38 trillion microbes are spread throughout almost every part of your body, but the vast majority are located in your digestive tract. Given that slightly over half the cells in your body belong to your microbial roommates, it perhaps isn't surprising that keeping those roommates happy is critical for your overall health. Dysbiosis, or an imbalance in the community composition of your gut microbiome, affects every system in your body. It's linked to everything from acid reflux to Crohn's disease to cardiac disease, even depression, schizophrenia, and Parkinson's. These aren't tentative correlations either. A recent reanalysis paper showed that across multiple disease types, significant alteration in species richness and diversity occurred. Now, while microbiome changes can be a result of many things, environmental effects, diet, stress, genetics, etc., we also know that these links to disease aren't even just correlative. Multiple studies have shown that disease phenotypes can be induced by replicating the disease-associated microbiome in an otherwise healthy individual. In a notable case, depression was induced in rats that were grown in a microbe-free environment by inoculating them with the fecal microbiome from depressed humans. From acid reflux to anxiety, B-bots are here to help. B-bots are tiny autonomous machines that act sort of like synthetic superpowered probiotics. These tiny machines integrate into your gut microbiome. Depending on the type of B-bot, they might set up shop in your stomach, small intestine, or colon. There, they perform the chemical reactions that your gut microbiome needs to get back on track. B-bots are inspired by nature. These reactions are performed by proteins, just like they are by the microbes inside you. Unlike in those microbes, our proteins are ultra-stable. Years of testing and modifications to the protein sequence ensures that once you swallow the capsules containing your B-bots, the proteins we've packed in can do their job for years. Though they're located in the gut, different B-bots are curated to perform reactions that benefit many body systems. I'll give you a couple examples. In the stomach, B-bots might perform reactions needed to synthesize vitamin B12, release compounds that will inhibit Helicobacter pylori, or stimulate the growth of Lactobacillus acidophilus. B-bots can even add new functionalities to your microbiome. One of the most popular is a B-bot that can produce famotidine in situ. Famotidine is the active ingredient in Pepsid. There's some in my bag. It's a proven way to control acid reflux. Vitamin B12 is critical for many bodily functions, and statistically, probably, I said 20, but I think it's going to be more like 30. 30 of us in this room have insufficient levels. H. pylori is the causative agent for most stomach ulcers, but Lactobacillus acidophilus, on the other hand, can help reduce the bloating and nausea associated with IBS and lactose intolerance, among other things. Now, I'm sure all the grad students in this room want to hear what B-bots can do for the brain, because I don't think anyone makes it through grad school without developing crushing anxiety. B-bots stimulate and, in some cases, perform synthesis of compounds like short-chain fatty acids, indole-3-propionic acid, GABA, and sialolactose. The role of these metabolites is complex, but in the right amounts, they can reduce central nervous system inflammation, increase blood-brain barrier integrity, prevent degradation of neurons, and balance neurotransmitters. These all serve to alleviate anxiety and depression. They can make ADHD symptoms more manageable, prevent neurodegenerative disease, among other things. Okay, the biochemistry is mostly over, I promise. So let's switch over to the mechanics of how B-bots work. So this is an image of some B-bots that'll take up residence in your stomach. So note the scale. Bee-bots are about the same size as most of the other microbes in your gut. These strings at the end are fimbriae, and they allow specific attachment to, in this example, the mucosa cells that line the stomach. This honeycomb texture prevents other microbes from tethering to them and interfering with their function. Bee-bots are ready to go when you receive them. Once you ingest the capsules they're stored in, they'll find their spots in your gut and get to work. Let's quickly run through this simplified bee-bot diagram. So here are those attachment fimbriae we've already discussed. In the middle is the energy source for bee-bots. Using chemical energy like real microbes do requires too much metabolic flexibility. Instead, we've designed this tiny energy harvester. It uses piezoelectric energy. So that means it gleans energy from vibrations. We've designed it to be able to respond to a large number of frequencies, enabling it to get sufficient energy just from your natural movement. Those cloudy shapes are the proteinaceous catalysts. Depending on the type, some might be docked on the bee-bot membrane, others free-floating, and still others linked to the energy harvester. The latter proteins need an energy input to do their job. When the desired substrate comes in through these transporter pores, it brings these two protein subunits together. Proteins are conductive, so we've keyed these to undergo the conformational change needed to do the reaction when a current passes through. The last few components are engaged only when deactivation of a bee-bot is required. If a user decides they no longer want a certain bee-bot, they can go into the handy user app and trigger its deactivation. Of course, customer support can also do this remotely if necessary. There are 3 simple components needed for deactivation: the Bluetooth receiver, a lipid vesicle holding signal peptides, and a receptor attached to the polar fimbriae. First, the Bluetooth signal is received from the user app. That allows an electric pulse to be transferred from the energy harvester to the vesicle. That then disrupts the lipid membrane, allowing the peptides inside to escape. The signal peptides bind to the dissolution receptor, and that binding lets the receptor start a cascade that results in the dissolution of those attachment fimbriae. Once the bee-bot is loose, it'll be flushed from the body like food waste. Okay, thanks for holding on through that sprint introduction to bee-bots. But we here at bee-bots Incorporated aren't just here to offer you a nature-inspired single-dose treatment that can be customized to fit your needs. That's not enough for us. We're continually pushing the envelope. For example, due to a recent breakthrough, we're offering new love bugs bee-bots. They augment your natural pheromones just to give you that extra sparkle out there. We've also developed specialized bee-bot mixes that emphasize efficient nutrient extraction from poor quality diets, and we offer them at a subsidized rate to low-income families. Just doing our part to help fight food insecurity in America. Okay, give me a sec to let my break character. In my piece, Pre-Subscribe, we opened on a young scientist named Katie as she presents bee-bots to various possible investors. If I was trying to leave here with all of you having committed money to my new bee-bots venture, I'd probably stop the presentation here. However, that's not what I'm here to do. I don't need to explain to this audience that all technology comes with drawbacks and social and ethical complications. For example, this behind me, those are the terms and conditions for the Amazon Alexa. Yikes. In Pre-Subscribe, we meet Breyer, a young man from Ellensburg, Washington. Throughout this piece, he experiences some of the major benefits of bee-bots. Breyer elected for their balance mix to address his anxiety and recurrent panic attacks, but then unfortunately discovers how the magnitude of those benefits might serve to amplify the drawbacks of medical technology when it's controlled by corporate interests. It's no secret that privatized for-profit medical industry in the US propagates systemic inequities. Health outcomes for marginalized groups for even routine procedures are significantly worse than they are for white, wealthy, cisgender people. And these statistics will undoubtedly continue to worsen given the policy changes we're seeing today. In Pre-Subscribe, I touch on a few separate factors that come into play because of the for-profit nature of bee-bots. First, I question how regulatory bodies will regulate technology like bee-bots that, to some degree, transcend traditional categories. Here, BBOTs are marketed effectively as a supplement, so they don't require the same level of FDA approval. They can be put to market much more quickly and don't require prescription or costly doctor's appointments. However, supplements are rarely covered by insurance providers. Secondly, industrial innovation relies on patents. Patents provide protection and thus safer profitability for 20 years once initiated, and strategic modifications to the technology can enable effective extensions. The ethics of patents in the medical world aside, it does mean that in the early days of BBOTs, meaningful competition would be easily nullified. However, the main focus of this piece rests on the decision to convert access to BBOTs to a subscription model. Given the meteoric success of the subscription economy, this probably seems like a logical choice, and one that might seem logical to consumers, given that we already pay monthly for our prescriptions, among a myriad of other things. Subscription services offer a guise of affordability. What's $8.99 a month for unlimited streaming, right? However, incremental price increases are a near ubiquitous practice among subscription services. Even if advance notice is ostensibly provided, these changes are often missed by subscribers. For example, how many of you have Netflix? Netflix just increased, thank you, its standard plan rate to $17.99 a month this year. And our regular prescription drugs aren't exempt from these sorts of cost increases. The top 25 Medicare Part D drugs have about doubled in price since market launch. And 21% of US adults have foregone necessary prescriptions because of the cost. Now, BBOTs aren't Netflix, and nor are they your daily SSRI. However, in pre-subscribed, the monthly cost of Brian's BBOTs followed the same trend. And like many of us, Brian wasn't keeping a close eye on the automatic withdrawals for what he thought would be a consistent monthly expense. It wasn't until he received notice of failed payment from the company and a warning of imminent termination without payment that he realized the price had rocketed out of range of his budget. The Bluetooth-enabled termination pathway of BBOTs grants the company unfettered ability to do just that. Terminate with limited notice and recourse in a way that's less like canceling Hulu and more akin to the bank repossessing your house and then burning it down. Breyer's BBOTs had been effective. His baseline anxiety was minimal and flare-ups were manageable. Like all BBOTs, they performed critical functions within a stabilized microbiome and were efficient producers of important cellular metabolites. Those BBOTs may, by necessity, end up being the primary source of some of these important metabolites. So each circle here represents a microbe, and each line that connects them indicates a relationship based on one or more metabolites. Especially if those metabolites produced by BBOTs have widespread downstream uses, other microbes in the ecosystem can become dependent on BBOTs for these products. This can result in BBOTs becoming a central node in the metabolic network, a keystone, if you will. If you suddenly remove the keystone, you lose the source of those products and the functions needed to keep the ecosystem stable and functioning. As a result, the ecosystem falters or might even collapse, leaving it vulnerable to replacement by an unhealthy dysbiotic system. This would manifest as aggressive, long-lasting withdrawal effects. After Breyer's BBOTs were deactivated, his anxiety returned worse than ever, accompanied by depressive symptoms, severe cramping, bloating, and nausea. If you stop paying, no company that I know of would offer to slowly wean you off, connect you to a doctor to manage the transition, and find cheaper alternatives. Pre-subscribe ends with a statement from one of the founders of the company. Dr. Bhattacharya severed ties with BBOTs shortly after they introduced their subscription model. BBOTs were never going to be a one-and-done cure. They're closer to a prosthetic, a pacemaker for your gut. No company should be able to suddenly turn that off if you can't make a payment one month. I still think that BBOTs can and will do a lot of good if they're put in the hands of those that aren't in it for the profit. Thank you.
Yeah, super interesting. So I guess first to start this question, I will divulge my medical history. So I have an autoimmune condition, as do something like 10% of all Americans. So it's actually really common. And one of the annoying things about that is as you get older, oftentimes certain foods no longer agree with you. And it turns out it's really hard to figure out what exactly might be the issue. Because if you think about it, you like eat a piece of pizza, you don't know, like all of a sudden your stomach hurts. And you're like, all right, is it the cheese? Is it the gluten? Is it the garlic? Is it the onions? You don't know. So I'm wondering if you think BBOTs, instead of just being able to use to treat something, could also have a use to diagnose as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess a great suggestion. I think there's definitely a possibility for that. I would imagine that that would have to do with kind of characterizing which metabolites might accumulate that aren't being processed as they should, either by your microbiome that for some reason isn't being, maintained by your body as it is, or, just like by your ability of your cells to process those ingredients. However, I think at the moment, our understanding of the kind of metabolic structure of the gut microbiome isn't quite advanced enough that we could say, okay, we're seeing that you have an accumulation of fructose. That means that you need to cut out these things. Something like that might actually be a little bit simpler. It might be, okay, you cut out apples. But for anything beyond kind of a general intolerance, I don't know that we're there yet. But I definitely think we could get there.
Great.
Thank you for that. And I sort of share your sense of some of the pitfalls of technologies like this in a for-profit healthcare system. But I wonder if you could say a bit about how things look in a not-for-profit healthcare system. So there's still going to be limited resources, and there will be kind of decisions about investment in kind of speculative, potentially startup resource-intensive technologies like this versus proven technologies that might be distributed more widely. So could you say, like, how you see the sort of ethical scenario of things like this playing out potentially better or maybe not in that kind of not-for-profit environment?
Yeah, definitely. So full disclosure, I'm Canadian. I grew up with universal healthcare. And I think something like this, and most things would work much better in that environment. I think for this to work out the best way it possibly could would be for it to probably start in an academic environment and kind of stay within that for much of the development. At least within Canada, the funding available for research is in general much smaller than it is in the US. And the venture capital is just not there in the same way, which does make that sort of development more difficult. But I think if there were governmental regulations in place that stipulated if you are creating a medical technology, first that it must undergo kind of rigorous classification as to what we class this as. So BBOTs, I think you could get through as a supplement, but they really aren't. And if you had to do, once you've kind of determined what it is, if you're going to do some sort of clinical trial, it has to be paired with multiple academic labs that maintain connection throughout the entire process, something like that.
Great. Brad.
Thanks. I think I want to ask a question about the economics rather than the technology. So,
Oh no.
so the BBOTs are developed by a for-profit company that presumably wouldn't have been incentivized to develop it if there had been no prospect of making money off of it. And so I'm not really sure what you're describing some bad thing that goes on when they increase the price, and I agree it's bad when prices go up, but there's a reason when prices go up, it incentivizes other companies to get into the market or develop alternative technologies, and if there's no profits to be made from healthcare innovations, then things like this won't be invented in the first place. So I just feel like you're being a little bit too, throwing too much shade on the profit motive.
We can never throw too much shade on the profit movement. No, I mean, it's a good point. And the question of, for example, patents in the medical industry goes back and forth kind of on that point. Is it giving a monopoly, or is it actually inciting competition and iteration? And I think most schools of thought land on the latter, that patents are important. And that's, in terms of profitability, that's kind of why I do think it should start from an academic setting and be linked to that throughout development, because there is motivation that isn't just how much money can we pump out of this. And then once it becomes something that is produced by a company but regulated and dispensed by the government, then prices might still go up, but that's not landing on the consumer. And you're not putting consumers in a place where they have to see if they can make that every month, which I know is the case with all prescriptions in countries that have non-universal healthcare. I think BBOTs just kind of take that to a next level of what that would look like. I do recognize I think the underlying question is an extremely debated one, so I'm really only offering my opinion there. But I do think it's an important thing to consider all sides, and I definitely don't want to discount that.
Great, Mazia.
I disagree. I think profit is bad, so I think you're right. So my question is actually about not about capitalism at all. It's about if you think about maybe something similar, which is insulin pumps, right? Insulin pumps are a fantastic technology that keep lots of people alive. There's a whole sub-community of people who hack their insulin pumps because they don't like the schedule that it's on, right? And they've noticed it doesn't work well for them, right? And so there's whole sub-communities of patient advocates that hack them and try to make sure that the insulin delivery works well for them, right?
Yeah.
Which has dangers, right? But there's a lot of people who are very happy with that. You could also imagine somebody, especially if it's Bluetooth enabled, hacking a device and having it do something really bad to you, right? So not the company, right? But a person who wants to do something bad. Do you have any thoughts on how you can maybe make technologies that are acting in your body, like we already have for insulin pumps, safe to this kind of sabotage, hacking? I mean, hospitals are already held hostage by hackers, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. With BBOTs, the way they're currently designed, really the only thing the user can do is turn them off. And once they're off, they're out of your body. That's not to say that if someone is turning them off willy-nilly, there won't be adverse effects. Clearly, we're seeing that when the company is terminating them. However, I'd imagine in a case where a user is choosing to terminate them voluntarily, there would be kind of safeguards in place and suggestions that you contact customer support on how best to do that. So because the BBOTs that you choose are preloaded with proteins, those proteins can only do certain reactions. So I think the potential for abuse in that way is lower, and the customizability that is inherent in having this Bluetooth technology would actually potentially give users the opportunity to make small changes that benefit them in the way that potentially slightly changing the insulin schedule would, without giving undue harm.
Great, Nancy.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Thank you for presenting this. And I say this as a Sloan graduate student, so back to the business thing.
Oh, no.
But as someone who principled, innovative leaders, underscore the principled part. So I understand where we're coming from like the profit piece. But I can't help think about how the revenue model could be different here. And I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I think in the US we have a huge issue with like sick care instead of health care. And so this, to me, when I was like just like reflecting on the beginning of your presentation, comes across as like, could people pay instead of the subscription piece, but pay for like the benefits that they get, like the healing that they get as a result of like having a healthier gut? I'm just curious if like, have you thought about that in terms of you pay for result as opposed to just like access on like a monthly cadence, which I agree is a slippery slope, and you know, capitalism has all these tentacles and et cetera. But like, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we could start, this could also be a way to change the way we think about healthcare in the US and beyond. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And the kind of subscription idea that I offer here is just one example of how that could kind of go wrong. I think the paying for results is really a great option. I think you would kind of need to have impartial evaluators in place, and I don't know exactly who that would be, if it would still be your primary care physician, who then starts you on this regimen, which I guess is kind of the case with prescriptions and treatments nowadays. If something isn't working, you change it. But in that, you're not really paying for results. Oops, yikes. I definitely see that as something that would produce innovation, because a company would be dedicated to making something that works better and works faster and works longer. Yeah, the mechanics I'm not exactly sure of, but I definitely think that's a really good potential route to keep this safe and beneficial for everybody.
Great. So the last question is from Armando.
So what is the advantage of this kind of approach compared to actually using real bacteria, maybe genetically engineered to actually do what they are? That just seems like a much simpler technology to deploy than something like this, which seems much more complicated.
Yeah, great question. So a lot of us already take probiotics. If you don't, you probably should. And those definitely really can help. And if you have a gut microbiome that is really dysregulated, eating a lot of yogurt is not going to fix everything. We do already have treatments in place that are a little more extreme to kind of replace an unhealthy microbiome, and that's primarily through fecal transplants. Those offer less control and customization than something like BBOTs would. It also, while you could genetically engineer these bacteria, I think having the security of the longevity of something like BBOTs and the understanding that this is exactly what they're doing, they're producing just these compounds and responding in just these ways, would make them a lot easier to implement and would likely act faster than trying to get natural bacteria to establish a foothold in your body. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Annaliese. Thank you. So now it's time for the judges to sequester in your special room.